This is the book Winchee, Mission Stories of Colin and Melva Winch by S Ross Goldstone. The true adventures of missionary pilots and nurses in the South Pacific, as retold to the children of Watertown SDA Church. I'm your storyteller, Austin Bacchus. Let's go! Today's chapter is Kukudu. Excitement mounted as the Varivato approached Kolombagara Island and the Kukudu mission station. Colin and Melva stood on the bow of the boat, gazing at the sight before them. They noted the cone-shaped 6,000-foot extinct volcano that dominated the island. The blue waters of the ocean rose and fell right up to the coconut palm shoreline. There was no harbor to enter. Instead, the captain steered the ship toward an indented coastline from which a wharf projected into the sea. The Amyas Memorial Hospital came into view among the coconut palms, slightly elevated above the shoreline. Across the stream was a school and the Harveys' residence. The more Colin saw of this tropical paradise, the more he fell in love with it. "Thank you, God, for giving us the joy of serving you in this glorious place," he prayed. They were only a little way from the wharf when their attention was drawn to a happy crowd of Solomon Islanders gathered to meet the new doctor and his wife. The curious crowd included older folk, women with babies on the hip, tall, strong men with muscular frames, young men and girls, children from the school, all with big smiles, shining white teeth, fuzzy-wuzzy hair, and ebony bodies. It seemed the whole community had gathered in welcome. A long line was formed, and as the handsome new doctor, because of course Colin wasn't a doctor, he was a nurse, but they called him doctor, and the somewhat more shy bride alighted from the boat, the welcoming handshakes began. The line seemed to go on forever until finally Melva said, "Haven't we seen that face before?" This man had a toothless grin and an unusual gait, standing out from the crowd. They realized people were doubling back into the line for a second and sometimes third handshake and a look at the new arrivals. The Harveys kindly took Colin and Melva into their home as the new missionaries' pre-ship belongings had not yet arrived. There was to be no rest, however, for the new hospital superintendent. Colin was soon called on for his medical expertise. Late on their first night, Colin heard the patter of feet on the ladder to the veranda. The visitor knocked, and Erwin Harvey went to answer the door. Melva woke, and Colin said to her, "I have a feeling I'm about to have my first patient." A moment later, Erwin knocked softly on the door. "Colin, are you awake?" he asked. "They need you over at the hospital." When Colin left the veranda, he realized he had forgot to bring a torch. That's their word for flashlight. He tried to walk over the unfamiliar path and then remembered there was a stream to cross, and the bridge had been built haphazardly, changing directions in several places. A couple of times, Colin's foot missed the planking on the bridge altogether, and he was in danger of tumbling into the stream below. Fortunately, since no one was around to see, he dropped to his knees and crawled across the bridge until he reached the other side. Eventually, Colin stumbled into the hospital. A patient was vomiting copious amounts of blood and coughing furiously. Colin ordered medication to stop the bleeding. He asked for ice. None was available. The large kerosene refrigerator containing the medicines was up at the doctor's residence, and it didn't work anyway. The next morning, the patient was transported on the Varivato to the government hospital in Gizo and admitted there, but unfortunately he died a few days later. It was not an impressive start to Colin's career as a medical missionary. The next chapter is called Mistaken Enthusiasm. It is inevitable that inexperienced missionaries will make mistakes in their cross-cultural ministry and with their enthusiasm to change lives with the gospel. Colin was no exception. It was a hot, steamy Sabbath afternoon, and Colin asked Lakana, the chief national doctor boy, to take him and Melva to the small Hansenide colony, where as many as 12 lepers resided. Colin knew a little about leprosy, having spent a week at Sydney University studying tropical diseases. His reading of the Bible had made him aware that leprosy was considered a highly infectious disease in Bible times. To his surprise, he learned that it was no longer considered highly contagious and that appropriate drugs could arrest the progress of the disease. Did you guys know that, by the way? So, what was called leprosy in Bible times, that same name was given to a new infection in more modern times, but people have realized by studying it that it's not the same disease that took place back in the Bible. So the correct name for that disease now is called Hansen's disease, named after one of the scientists who studied it. So nowadays, we use modern terms for it. Instead of calling it leprosy, we call it Hansen's disease. And instead of calling somebody with leprosy a leper, they refer to them as a Hansenide. And so I'm going to use those terms in the rest of the book here when we talk about those characters too. Okay? While Colin may have relayed this information to Melva, her reaction to close contact with this horrible disease was still based on the information found in the Bible. One does not change long-established thinking overnight. Consequently, she was most apprehensive as she accompanied her husband and Lakana down the beautiful croton-lined road to the colony. Colin shared his wife's apprehension, but he was determined to demonstrate compassion and acceptance and to change the islanders' reaction to Hansen's disease. When he informed Melva that he was going to shake hands with the Hansenides and wanted her to do so also, Melva was terrified. Because again, she still thought about about this disease as leprosy, which in the Bible, nobody touched a leper, right? You had to be so afraid of a leper. She thought such an act could curtail their mission service and possibly leave them with the same hideous physical disfigurement that they were seeking to counteract. The professor had said the disease was no longer considered highly contagious. That did not deny that it was contagious under certain circumstances. While she admired Colin's determination to change attitudes, she doubted the wisdom of what he was about to do. On arrival, the newly arrived missionaries noted the beautiful white-painted houses with their thatched roofs, neatly laid out on each side of the clearing. They also noted a little thatched chapel at one end of the clearing and a dispensary and surgery down by the beach. At the entrance of the compound, they were met by the head Hansonide, Ronnie, who greeted them in impeccable English. "Mr. and Mrs. Winch, I welcome you to the Solomon Islands and to our humble home." Colin moved forward and to Ronnie's surprise held out his hand. "Ronnie, I want to shake your hand," he said. Ronnie was confused. He knew this was taboo, forbidden. He was not permitted to touch a clean person. Now it seemed this new doctor missionary really wanted to shake hands. Ronnie extended his hand and with a beaming Solomon Island smile shook Colin's hand. Lakana, the doctor boy, was shocked. He had never shaken a Hansonide's hand, except when wearing a surgical glove. What was this crazy white man doing? His information about Hansen's disease was also based on Bible times. Melva cringed. She knew what was coming. "Honey," said Colin, "would you like to shake Ronnie's hand also?" With fear in her eyes but a smile on her face, Melva stepped forward and shook the hand. And then it happened. The other Hansonides had seen the drama unfold. Rushing down the pathways, they greeted the missionaries, extending their hands to be shaken. Some had no fingers. Others were limping on toeless feet. But with only one exception, they all joined in the joyful greeting. The one exception was a woman, Ba by name, endeavoring to hide behind a coconut palm near her cottage. "Let's go over and greet this lady," Colin said to Melva. With the wisdom of a woman's instinct, Melva tried to discourage her husband from doing so. In his sincere desire to identify with the Hansonides, showing he had no fear of defilement, this new missionary failed to listen to the wisdom of his wife and persisted with his intention. Putting on his best welcoming smile, he approached the poor woman and said, "Ba, I would like to shake hands with you." Her eyes were on the ground as she slunk further around the tree. Still Colin persisted, following her around the tree until finally, with a shamed expression on her lowered face, she extended the stump of her arm to him. She had no hands. Shocked, Colin shook her arm and retreated to the chapel, chagrined and mortified. He had caused emotional hurt to the poor woman. A great lesson had been learned. Medical care of the Hansonides involved monthly testing of tissue taken from their earlobes to determine the presence of the bacillus in the surface tissue. If the tests were clear over a 3-month period, then the delighted patient was permitted to leave the colony and return home. Conversely, there was great disappointment should the test show the ongoing presence of the bacillus. Colin was responsible for carrying out these tests, so he became intimately aware of the emotional fluctuations of the Hansonides. While studying tropical diseases at Sydney University, he was made aware of the importance of trimming the lesion's edges in order to allow good tissue to fill in and heal their sores. Lakana advised Colin of these weekly procedures, which he demonstrated in the surgical room at the Kukudu Hansonide Clinic. Hansen's disease affects the nerves, particularly of peripheral areas such as fingers and toes, resulting in no sensation of pain in such affected areas. The fingers may be burnt on contact with a hot cooking pot, or the toes might be stubbed on a rock, and in such cases the Hansonide is unaware of any damage done unless they smell burning flesh or see blood seeping from the wound. As a result, sores form and infection eats away at the appendages. To Colin's horror, Lakana administered no anesthetics, but just proceeded to remove the affected flesh with a tool called a bone nibbler. Colin was horrified and nauseated, but the patient exhibited no discomfort. Often the patient carried on an animated conversation about some planned activity for later in the day. There were outbursts of laughter as stories were shared or jokes were told. It was a strange, new, and unsettling experience for Colin to observe. When some of the lesions didn't respond to treatment, it was decided to invite Dr. Scott, a young British doctor based at Gizo Public Hospital, to visit the clinic and perform surgery on the worst affected feet. Colin was to administer the anesthetics. While he had witnessed many operations and on one occasion even anesthetized one of Dr. Tulloch's patients under the supervision of Dr. Letham, Colin had never administered open ether. The first patient, Jeremiah, was to have surgery and was given a pre-med some 40 minutes before being wheeled into the very basic theater. The drowsy Jeremiah was placed on the operating table where Colin placed a mask over his nose and mouth and began to administer the anesthetic. When it was deemed that the Hansonide was sufficiently anesthetized, Colin gave the signal for surgery to commence. Blowflies, with obvious intention, frantically buzzed on the screen windows attempting to enter the cutting room. Dr. Scott began to make the necessary incisions, but Jeremiah's foot moved. "He's a bit light there, Cole," said the surgeon. "Give him more ether." Completing a neat flap across the bottom of the foot, Dr. Scott covered what had been a large lesion. When the stitching was complete and the dressings applied, Colin turned down the anesthetic and slapped the patient gently on the cheek, saying, "Wake up, Jeremiah, it's all over." Jeremiah's eyes flashed open. He exclaimed, "How sad you talk, wake up? Me no sabi sleep yet," meaning, "Wake up, I haven't even fallen asleep yet." The hot and humid climate had caused much of the ether liquid to evaporate before Jeremiah had a chance to breathe it in. Dr. Scott suggested that maybe Colin should give a lot more ether to the next patient, and the chagrined medic was happy to comply. Be sure to tune in next time for more stories from the book Winchee by S. Ross Goldstone, which is available at the Adventist Book Center. And meanwhile, check out these videos and others on my channel, with many more mission stories and Bible skits for kids and adults. God bless you.